Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. I'm James Baggett, founder of Car Dealer Magazine, and today I've got the team from Lawgistics back again to answer your legal questions. Now, joining me once again, backed by popular demand, I must say, they were here last Wednesday. We've got Kirill Moskovchuk. I will get that right one day, Kirill. Say hello.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Kirill. Nona Balkis, who is a solicitor for the firm, and Jason Williams, who's a former trading standards officer. Sorry, I should say Kirill is also an employment law specialist. Okay, we're happy to take live questions too today, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you can ask them via the chat function. They'll be fed through to me and I'll try and get through as many as possible. I know there's several service and repair garages out there tuning in today, so get in touch if you've got questions and I'll do my best to get to them. Okay. Let's get cracking. Firstly, to you, Kirill. We touched on this subject last week. It's something that's still a bit of a hot potato, furloughing staff. What's the latest on this for car dealers and garages to take into consideration?
Well, we now have guidance from the government. We still don't have the full regulations and the portal is still not up and running. The latest is that the portal will be ready by the end of April. But we do have some quite useful guidance. It's on the government website. The crux of it is that the staff should be on the PAYE as on the 28th of February this year or later, and the system should be up and running at that date. It's worth remembering that the government says that the staff who was made redundant after 28th of February may then be redeployed and put on furlough. That doesn't apply to those who resign or who were dismissed for other reasons, only for those who were made redundant. So if someone leaves your employer and comes back to you to say, well, take me back, put me on furlough, the grant will not be paid in those circumstances. Specifically, as far as the service garages go, we have quite a number of inquiries about this issue. There is specific exemption for car and MOT services. They continue to operate as normal. There is no requirement for them to shut down. As long as they comply with obviously the protection requirements as published, the government guidelines as to the health and safety at work, they run as normal. So in those cases, those garages shouldn't be looking to furlough their staff unless there is a drop in their orders. And they can show their order book to say, well, we have orders, say, for this week. There is a marked drop for the following week, and then we have nothing for the next 2 or 3 weeks. That is a redundancy situation. You can make your staff redundant. But we expect that HMRC will be looking into this and maybe investigating post the event, whether you did have a genuine redundancy situation so that you had to make your staff redundant to lay them off. And then as an alternative, you were looking at putting them on a furlough leave. The only other case which was added in the published guidelines is when your staff is following the published guidelines as to the social shielding. So say they're in the vulnerable group, or they're over 75, whatever, or they have some chronic condition that makes them particularly susceptible to the coronavirus, they can also be put on the furlough leave.
Okay, Kirill, I've got lots of questions on this and some coming in online, so I'm just going to dive into a little bit of the detail. We'll go back to the garages point in a moment about how they deal with this. But firstly, let me move on to directors. So can a director of a business be furloughed and how does that work?
If the director is on the PAYE and drawing salary from the company, to that extent, yes, they can be put on furlough leave, provided they satisfy the criteria. They on payroll, as I say, as on 28th of February, they were on payroll that date. And obviously they will get 80% or 2,500 per month, whichever is the lower. The problem is that quite a few directors, they draw dividends instead of salary, and dividends essentially are not covered. Another element which still isn't covered, and there's clarification on this in the guidelines, is that any commission or bonus aren't covered either. So that put lots of sales staff to a detriment. There is an online petition against it, but as it stands at the moment, that's specifically excluded from the furlough pay.
So I'd like to come on to that as well in a moment, if I may. I'm just turning to a question here from Carly Welsh. So she said, if a director has been furloughed and a customer inquires online, can we still sell the customer a car and deliver it even though officially furloughed? I mean, I would say the answer to that is no. You're effectively not allowed to work, surely.
I'm afraid, Carly, will have to agree with James fully here. Be careful if you put your staff on furlough, directors or no directors. With very limited exceptions, they mustn't be doing any work for your company. The only permissible exception is training and volunteering, and still training mustn't be linked to any activity that generates revenue for the company. So I would say to keep your staff in the loop, say a round of emails to say, well, this guy's what's been happening with the company or generally in the market, that's absolutely fine. But requiring your staff to do any training over and above, that's certainly may put your furlough grant in danger. And also, certainly, if the directors continue to do work with the company, that's another difficulty a number of directors will be facing because there'll be no one else to look after the company. And the furlough grant may be put in danger if they continue to do any work at all for the company.
There's probably a very high chance there's going to be some serious checks after this period. Have you got any information on what that will be, and any warnings to businesses that might be thinking that they can carry on doing some stuff with their furloughed staff during this time?
There is nothing published officially, but certainly we expect there will be quite a bit of litigation after the event, either from the employees or indeed arguing with the HMRC whether the business also wasn't eligible to receive the grant. I say there is nothing yet apart from the warning to self-employed that they should be submitting their returns by the 23rd of April, and the closer to the date you are, the keener interest the HMRC will take in your return. Other than this, I say we don't have anything official yet, but we certainly will be expecting there will be quite a great interest from the HMRC post the event, or indeed we don't know what exactly the details they'll be asking, and whether there will be provision for them to get back to you and clarify some details before they issue a grant, which I fully expect that may be the case.
I just want to go back to one of the points you made a little earlier about these staff that could come back and ask to be furloughed if they've been made redundant. I mean, that's going to be a worry to a number of businesses. They've made that redundancy choice at that time because they really needed to for their business. How on earth are they going to deal with those former employees coming back to them asking that they should now be put on a furlough payment?
If they will qualify otherwise and then would simply made redundant, I think the safer position would be to put them on furlough, redeploy them and put them on furlough. But the fact that someone is on furlough leave doesn't prevent the employer from following the redundancy procedure. So you can still carry on the redundancy procedure and perhaps be in the consultation stage of it, so that when the furlough leave ends and we're still having restrictions or the business not viable or any other reasons, the business doesn't require so many workforce. So all the provisions will be placed to make them redundant at the end of the furlough leave.
There's a few questions coming in here about the 80% and how that's going to be paid into companies, and it's one of the questions I've got here. This one's coming from the UK Pop Tops. I'm going to use that to move on to that subject. Have we got any information as to when the payments are going to be made to businesses? Because some companies, like my own, pay staff on the 15th of the month. Some pay them weekly. There's going to be a big impact on cash flow. Do we know when this cash is going to arrive into businesses' pockets?
So we don't. I'm sorry, no, I shall pass it over to you.
I'll give you a rest from there. Well, at the moment, the HMRC are still writing their portal. And so until that is up and running, they can't possibly issue the payments. They are talking at the moment that will be ready by the end of April. In any case, employers cannot claim bits and pieces of furlough. It has to be in 3-week blocks. So the minimum time you can furlough a member of staff for is 3 weeks. So we're really waiting on that. And what that's initially, if you look at the guidance, it said it would be a reimbursement. So I think initially the government was expecting employers to pay that money and then claim it back from the government. But I think the climate has changed slightly for that, and the wording now talks about grants. So it may be that employers haven't got the money to pay their employees, and they simply won't have in some cases. So then the employer can claim when the portal is up and running. There is the option of these business interruption loans, that should be available for many banks. But what we're hearing is the banks either haven't got enough staff to answer the calls, to process them, or they're asking directors to put a personal guarantee against them. And there was some noise on social media, so I don't know which banks they were and where that was going, but the idea is the government is kind of backing them. So the banks should be giving businesses these business interruption loans to sort of tide them over. But certainly in terms of furlough, it's 3-week blocks and the portal is not up and running yet, and we don't know when that will be up and running.
We covered the business interruption loans in quite some detail on the Car Dealer Magazine website yesterday. And I think the personal guarantees are on loans over £250,000. So under that, they're not asking for a personal guarantee. But I did see on the news this morning that there's a lot of companies struggling to get them. Some of the rates are very high. And at the end of the day, these are loans and they do need to be repaid. Yes, you don't have to have pay the interest for the first 6 months, I believe, but you are going to have to pay that money back. And the other thing to bear in mind is there are early redemption penalties. So you can't just borrow this money, put it in your bank account and think that it's going to help tide you over and you'll pay it back in 6 months' time, because you'll be penalised for that. So just one of the other things I wanted to touch on while you're here, Nona, we'll stay with you. On the furloughed staff, there's a question here again about accruing holiday. So if we could move on to that one, that would be good. Do staff accrue holiday? And at the same time, how do you put a staff member on furlough? I mean, there's a lot of companies that have had to do this already. I've had to do it in my business, but we are sort of doing it blind. There's no official guidance. So I mean, what can you advise companies on that front?
Yeah, well, if some people have got contracts, which they will have, and certainly the ones that have downloaded them from our HR manager system, they will have a layoff clause in there. So that technically would allow you to furlough people without getting their express consent. But if you don't have a layoff clause in your contract, because you're contracted to pay people 100% and you're basically varying their terms, you need to talk to the individuals and get their permission to only pay them 80%. Most people are going to agree, but you need to get that consent. I saw a letter this morning where a company had written out and said, we assume you want this. So they've gone through unless you tell us otherwise, we're paying you 80%. Now, if you look at consent definition in GDPR, for example, and we went all through that, that had to be a very positive, yes, we want that, but there is no actual guidance at the moment. But really, unless you've got a layoff clause in your contract, you should get some sort of consent, even if that's just an email from your employee that they agree to accept 80% of their salary going forward. And just picking up on the accruing holiday, yes, people will accrue holiday because all their employment rights carry on. And this is one of the issues, because I'm just looking at a tweet from Martin Lewis, who's obviously a bit of a national treasure and is looking after people. He's saying, some people angry for giving me false hope, no employer will do it. He's talking about being re-employed. Kirill talked about in the redundant, if you've made someone redundant, you can take them back on. But what if you've paid that person a redundancy payment? You know, how do you get that back off them? So you might want to say, I'm taking you back on and furloughing you, but you need to pay us back X amount of money that we've paid you. So you probably need to get that into some sort of contract from there. And I think Martin Lewis is also saying, and he says, Treasury has confirmed with him that it's also for those that left voluntarily. So perhaps people that have got a new job, but were not on the payroll at a new job on the date at the end of February. But we wouldn't advise taking those people back on, because on this, you know, accruing holiday is one thing. So if you take them back on and this goes on 6 months, you're then going to end up having to pay that person 6 months of holiday pay when they leave again. So Martin Lewis is saying he spoke to Treasury and that's the thing to do, but we're very much more cautious about that. So if it's redundancy situation, yes, you can take them back on, but work out how you're going to get your money back, any redundancy payment you paid them. But if it's someone that's left and started another job, I'd be very cautious about that, despite what's going on social media out there. And unless we get any clarification, we would be saying don't do that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nona. I'm conscious that we've got lots of questions coming in here, and Chris, I will get to yours, I promise. We're going to move on to garages a little bit later. Just want to concentrate on the furloughing at the moment. One of the questions came in here from Sophie Jones, there's obviously still confusion out there. Do our body shop employees, e.g. mechanic, painters, prep team, have eligibility for furlough? I think it's probably worth recovering what makes an employee eligible for furlough, because I mean I would assume if those people don't have work, then absolutely they are eligible for it.
James and Sophie, just to clarify, the garages are allowed to continue running, so they, unless it is a redundancy situation or they're following the social shielding guidance, they will not be entitled to be put on furlough, your employees, your mechanics. And I would suggest you need to then, if it does come up to scrutiny, either at the payment of grants or at a later stage, you need to be able to prove to the HMRC that you had a drop in your sales. An alternative to the furlough leave would have been redundancy or laying off your staff. But as I say, also the second case is when someone is socially shielding, in which case they also can be put on furlough leave. Obviously, with their consent, if there is no lay of course in the employment contract.
So the test is if that person would otherwise be made redundant to help your business stay afloat,
correct,
can instead put them on furlough.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. There's just a few questions also come in here, and it's one of mine about the self-employed. There's Mark Brown has asked, I think he's a one-man band, limited company, possibly not himself, but might be asking on behalf of somebody else. Small dealers with contracted workers. Is a one-man band, limited company, self-employed or an employee? I would say that they are, it depends how they pay themselves, is that correct?
Correct, yes. Well, if you do have PAYE in the place, then you would be drawing the salary from the company and you'll be deemed as employed. And the test here is quite different from what the employment law would normally say. The main point, the main thing to look into really, whether you are on the PAYE or not, that will determine whether you're eligible for the furlough grant or not. And if you're not on the PAYE, then look into you'll be still classed as self-employed and eligible for this support from that side.
What about bank holidays? That's a good point that's just come in from Charlotte Ingle. Bank holiday pay during this time if employees are on furlough leave. How does that work? Hi,
Charlotte. Well, if they're on furlough leave, that does not come into play. I mean, they are on furlough leave. They are absent. That's it. The only guidance we have right now is specifically about the holidays. That, well, A, they continue to accrue as normal, and B, if the employee is unable to take the leave for the reason of the coronavirus and being on furlough, so he was deprived the opportunity to take the leave will be carried over into the next holiday year.
So a very good point has just come in from Suzanne Steele on that. What happens if staff have pre-booked holiday during their furlough period?
It still will be the case they cannot make use of their holidays because for the reasons of the furlough leave and for the reasons of the epidemic. So the carrying over rules will apply. They should be allowed to carry over their unused leave into the next leave year.
Okay, so that holiday wouldn't be paid as normal. They would just get their 80% payment.
Correct.
As part of it, and if and when they return to work, that holiday would resume.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Just another point on furlough. I will move on to some other stuff, but I know this is the hot topic at the moment. But in terms of redundancies, now this is a 3-month period, as I understand it, that the furlough period has been put in place. Mm-hmm. There is still a considerable cost, or there will be a cost that the businesses are going to be picking up when it comes to tax and national insurance that they have to still contribute to those furloughed staff's wages. Could we just talk a little bit about that? Because some businesses will be bringing in no money whatsoever. They will, and even those very tiny payments will be painful. What can they do about that? What do they need to consider? And should they make a redundancy during that furlough period if they can't afford to pay those small tax and national insurance payments?
Kieran on that. Yeah, if you look at the actual guidance on the gov.uk site, the employers will receive a grant to cover the 80% that we're talking about, plus the employer national insurance contributions and the minimum automatic enrolment employer pension contributions on that subsidised wage. So the employer will be getting back their NI, they will be getting back that part of the pension they are paying on behalf of the employee. So that that is going to help. This also, of course, says on here that fees, commission and bonuses should not be included, and obviously commission is a huge issue within the motor trade, and there are quite a few petitions going on about that, because that actually doesn't seem fair. I think in the case of the directors, some people would argue that if they've paid themselves minimum wage salary, that's what they should get. I mean, they've done that because that's what accountants have told them to do for years. So you can kind of see the government point of view on that. But I think on commission for salesmen, I think that's really tough. And we hope that some of this lobbying will result in commission being included. Because on here, when it says about to work it out, it does say employees whose pay varies. So I don't see why people, from a policy point of view, on commission can't go under that category. But at the moment, it clearly says no commission. So unless that changes, all those car salesmen and other industries where they rely heavily on commission, at the moment, they can only get on their base wage. And I think that does seem unfair, because they obviously the wage is what's coming in every month, whereas the dividend situation is slightly different, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have perhaps a turnaround on that, but we'll just have to wait and see on guidance. And until Rishi comes out to one of the daily government briefings, then I don't suppose there'll be anything, but we'll see what he says next.
I mean, I've had a huge amount of contact from salesmen who are absolutely devastated by the fact that commission is not involved. I know the IMDA has set up a petition to have that included, and we have covered that on the Car Dealer Magazine website, and it's picked up, well, at the latest from Umis was 16,500 signatures in 3 days, showing that there is a lot of angry people out there. I think what you've just said will probably give some people some hope. Do you think there might be a turnaround on this? And it's going to be very hard to calculate how that commission works. Surely, I mean, would they average it out over the last 12 months, say? Yeah,
well, the people that are on employees whose pay varies, that's exactly what it says it does. You know, you can average out earnings from the 2019-20 tax year. If the employee has been employed for less than a year, you can claim for average of their monthly earnings since they started work. So I don't see why that can't be the case. In fact, initially it didn't say. We all thought commission would be included. It was only when the government guidance come out, we're like, whoa, that isn't good news for a lot of people in our industry from there. Obviously, you know, they found this money tree, but it's not an ever-growing money tree, so they've got to put a stop somewhere. But to me, somebody that's got to take a massive drop in their monthly income, that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, that is a point on the commission payments, and I mean there will be some people out there that are now going to be paid less than the minimum wage. I mean, are employees allowed to do that, Kim?
And that's absolutely fine. We have specific guidance on this point that if 80% of the pay takes below the national minimum wage, national living wage, that is fine, because that's not really deemed as a reward for the work done. It's a subsidy. And yes, it can fall below the national minimum wage. And as you say, quite a lot of sales staff will be in a regrettable position. Not only they will lose the commission, their pay will be below the national minimum wage.
Okay, I'm going to leave furlough just for now, but I'm sure some more questions will come in, and if there's any relevant ones, I'll move back to them. So let's move on to garages and where they stand when it comes to closing and furloughing staff. And Chris, I know you're very persistent. You've asked the same question a few times, and I will definitely ask it for you now. He has closed his business on Monday. Everybody's on furlough, he says, and he has a handwritten diary that is proof. Is that proof enough that they've got no work, especially when there's 3 other garages in his village who are open? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I think we would hope so, basically. You've got to do whatever you feel will justify your decision, I think. I mean, HMRC, yes, they will, because obviously they're going to want to recoup some money, aren't they? So they're going to go out. I would think they would be quite stringent when all this is over, just to try and get some money back in the pot. But I don't think we have to be too crazy about it. But yeah, I think that would be fine, as long as you've got some sort of evidence. And of course, we've had emails from people where their mechanics have almost been abused as they've been going into work, because there are a lot of people out there that willfully or out of panic or for whatever reason misinterpret some of the rules, and they don't understand that garages can stay open, for example, the service and repair garages. So I've heard from some people who've shut their garage because they don't want their employees subject to people, especially in sort of village scenarios, possibly you know, where they're getting up a lot of bad vibes, and it's getting very judgy, and there's a lot of sort of moral decisions being made or not made. But from where we're sitting, you've got to go along with the law.
So, because there will be garages out there that have had a significant drop in work, but they are technically on the exemption list of those businesses that can remain open. And the point from the government is that key workers' cars need to be serviced. There might be an MOT exemption, however, cars need to be roadworthy. If they need new tyres, they have to have new tyres. And if they're broken down and these nurses can't get to work, they need to be fixed. At what point does a garage decide to close or to stay open? I mean, it's a very difficult one, isn't it? I mean, what would you advise them?
Yeah, it certainly is a very difficult one for all those reasons from there. And I know we have said they shouldn't close unless they have to and they can justify it. But I think most garages, unless you're in a village where there's 4 garages and the other 3 have closed down and you're the only one, chances are you might be quite busy. But in most scenarios, I think income is going to go down. And it's about being sensible and applying common sense, I think, and trying not to get involved in the moral argument and the judging of what everybody else is doing. Try and stick to the rules, and you can't go far wrong, I would hope.
And should these garage owners and the people who are talking to these customers check first who they're offering to do work with, because there will still be people that are pushing the limits of the rules. Should they be, to protect their business, checking that this person is a key worker and why they need their car fixed desperately at this point during this lockdown?
Well, that's quite open because they've been told they can stay open. I don't think it specifically says, unless one of the other 2 guys wants to correct me, it doesn't specifically say you can only stay open for key workers. Yes, that's the idea about it. You know, if you ask someone they're a key worker and they say yes, you know, you're not going to have an argument with them, are you, from there? But yeah, it doesn't specifically say, I don't think, that they have to be a key worker to stay open, but that is the general idea behind it, because key workers, and there are lots and lots and lots of key workers, whether they're lorry drivers, we're key workers because we're upholding the administration of justice. So people tend to think of key workers as just nurses and carers, but it's a very, very wide group of people. So there will be a lot of people out there that will be entitled to be using those services.
And I suppose the message to businesses is you need to take a business decision, because you can't run at a loss. I mean, I was chatting to Robert Forrester from Virtue Motors yesterday, Dash Gupta from Marshall Motor Group on Friday, and both of them are opening a lot of their franchise dealer service and repair workshops, but they're doing that at a loss. There's a lot of small garage owners and smaller car dealerships that simply won't be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, this is all about protecting your business and putting yourself in the best possible position you can in the circumstances to be able to carry on when all this is over. You know, it's all very well being nice to your staff and taking people back on and trying to keep open, but ultimately this is about keeping the economy going and having a business to come back to, because if there's no business to come back to, that's not going to help anyone.
Okay. Just a couple of questions here, from one from Vince and one from Chris. One says, are garages classed as key workers? And I think you've just answered that. They're on the exemption list, so technically, yes, they are. I wouldn't, correct me if I'm wrong. And Vince has asked, are garages exempt from all work, not just NHS or key workers? And I think we've sort of covered that point there. They probably need to check who they're doing the work for, but it's a bit of a grey area.
Yeah, it doesn't actually say in the legislation, it just says this is the list of businesses that can keep open, this is the list of businesses that must close. And even the ones that keep open, they have to do it in a certain way, which is why a lot of the dealers are now moving on to the distance sale stuff that Jason's going to talk about.
And I think probably morally, we've all got a very big duty of care to advise people to stay at home. And if they don't need their car during this period, and they don't need it repaired, probably not a good idea to do it now. Okay, I'm going to give Kirill and Nona a rest, and I'm going to go to Jason, who's been quietly waiting in the background there, and then I'm going to come back to some property stuff, and we will carry this on for a little bit longer because I know there's lots of questions coming in. So Jason, distance selling. This is a difficult one, isn't it, at the moment, because some dealers are selling cars, some aren't. People are probably doing it well outside of their comfort zone. So firstly, let's touch on the point whether should people be selling cars right now?
Well, the government's encouraging businesses to continue. Physical premises are not allowed to be open if you're selling cars, but I can't see any restriction on the ability to deliver cars. to people who buy them. And now the government, for example, will tell you that you should only leave the house to buy essential food, to exercise, or to go to your place of work if absolutely necessary. What we as lawyers have to do is look at the legislation and see whether there are more reasons for being able to leave the house. And in that regard, we have to look at the beautifully named Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulation 2020. And in there, it's beautiful, isn't it? We just refer to them as the regulations for obvious reasons. They have a larger list that has been promoted by the government. And one of those reasons that they give is to fulfill a legal obligation. Now, we would argue that if a garage has entered into a distance contract to supply a vehicle and has been paid for, either in full or as a deposit, the delivery of that vehicle to them is actually fulfilling a legal obligation. Because if that contract falls and doesn't happen, the consumer can still sue the trader for breach of contract potentially. So there is a legal obligation which the garage is fulfilling by delivering that vehicle ordered online to the consumer's premises, to the consumer's home, I should say.
But who's going to deliver that? Who's going to deliver that car for the dealer? I mean, if they're driving down the street in the car on trade plates and they're pulled over by the police, I mean, they're probably going to be frowned upon, surely.
Well, what we would say is, you know, the legislation clearly says that you are allowed out of your house to fulfill a legal obligation. And if you've got the order forms in front of you, telling you exactly where you're going and you're on a direct route to that location on your way back from it, then I think you can say that you can justify having left the house. I mean, don't forget, you know, all the delivery companies that are still going out and about are delivering goods to people's houses. All those goods have to be picked up from the shelf necessarily, handled, packaged, and driven halfway across the country to be deposited at someone's house. You know, and so strictly speaking, in the eyes of the law, we can't see although obviously the courts can only ultimately decide, we can't see where in law it says you can't deliver a vehicle if you are doing so to fulfill a legal obligation.
I suppose the other issue is the fact that there are a lot of dealers who are completely closed. There are some main dealers that are simply just taking orders and banking them. And there will be some other dealers out there that will take your advice and go, well, actually, that's fair game. We need to crack on. And, you know, rightly so, they need to keep their businesses running. It's going to cause some arguments, this, isn't it?
It's going to cause some arguments. And the important thing that they have to do is that when they deliver these cars, they must make sure that the consumer is given a 14-day cancellation notice that allows them to cancel the contract within 14 days. And I think if you see our legal update that we've done previously, we've suggested putting a mileage cap on there. I know one garage imposed a limit of 150 miles. So if you do more than 150 miles in that 14 days, which probably you shouldn't be doing at this time, then the supplier is entitled to charge, say, £1 a mile extra over that. So if you're giving the consumer a right to cancel it, and you are fulfilling a legal obligation in delivering that vehicle, I think the police would be hard pressed to take any action against you.
So do you think that the dealer or their supplier, whoever's delivering the car, could then go back and pick up that car from that customer under the current rules?
Well, if the consumer has cancelled the contract within the 14 days, I suppose there's the moral dilemma of, do you wait until the restrictions are lifted? But the point being then that all the risk in that vehicle lies with the trader once the car's been rejected, or not rejected, but cancelled. Or do you say that you are collecting it under the contractual obligation to allow the consumer to cancel that contract? It's still a contractual obligation that you are allowing them to fulfill, and which you are fulfilling by collecting that vehicle.
Question here on this point, or from Motordrome Land Rover. He says he's wary of the 14-day distance selling regulations returns policy as he thinks it's open to abuse. Can he not simply say this is not an organised distance sale, but it's put in place temporarily in response to the government directive? Is that going to cover him?
I think if you start doing with any degree of regularity and you're advertising that you're able to deliver this car, I think it might only be a temporary organised distance selling scheme, but it is still an organised distance scheme, even though it's temporary. So I would still err on the side of caution and have the cancellation notice. Because if you don't, and you don't give a cancellation notice, the period for the time that the consumer can cancel that contract can extend up to an entire year. So I take his point, and it might be correct, but I think I'd still err on the side of caution and say that it's still an organised distance, because you're advertising the fact that now you can deliver these cars to consumers without them having any face-to-face interaction with you. The odd one-off sale may be, but if you're doing it as part of your business model now, albeit for a temporary period of time, I think you're still doing an organised distance selling scheme. That's my personal opinion.
What about customers wanting to come and collect for a car that they've already paid for from a dealer's site in a contactless way? Is that possible? I mean, if that site's effectively closed, is it allowed?
Well, I think that would cause a problem. If someone's coming to collect a vehicle from your business premises, you could argue that business is open for the purpose of that collection, and they're not allowed to be open. And what you may find is that people who then buy a car on that basis, if they ever fall out with a dealer, the first thing they'll do is run and complain and say, "Oh, well, you broke the law by allowing me to come to your premises to collect it when you were technically closed and you were permitted not to open by law."
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. Thanks for your advice on that one. I just want to move on, just lastly to property leases, because there will be a lot of garages and car dealers out there that are in pretty onerous leases. Is there any way that they can alleviate the pressure here? For example, can they ask for a rent holiday on a commercial property? I don't know who wants to say that, but open floor.
I'll jump in there. Yeah, the answer is yes, they can. There's quite a lot of information on the gov.uk. I would always get the advice from there and not social media, as a lot of people seem to be doing. But that actually says on there, and I have it here, commercial tenants who cannot pay their rents because of COVID-19 will be protected from eviction. These measures will mean no business will automatically forfeit their lease and be forced out of their premises if they miss a payment up to the 30th of June. So basically, in these next 3 months, if you miss a payment because you haven't got the money to pay it because of COVID, the landlord cannot take action against you and evict you. But obviously, I wouldn't just not pay. I would have a conversation with your landlord and come to some sort of negotiation. We were talking to a landlord yesterday who had initially said, no, you've got to pay. But since this has come out, this new guidance, they've had to say, okay, you can have a 3-month payment holiday.
Is there a standard templated letter or anything? I mean, one of our forum users, the Cardian Magazine forum users, asked if there was a template letter that they could have access to. There's something that, or anything you could advise them to put in a letter to ask for that.
Yeah, we haven't done one yet, but we're happy to do one, and we can put it up on the website a bit later on. Probably do that. So I'll have to talk to Joel how quickly he can get that on there. But it will be under that act that Jason, no, it's not that act, it's a different act with an equally long name. I can't remember off the top of my head which is, but it says on there, section whatever. In fact, we'll email it to you and you can perhaps put it out to people.
That'd be great. Yeah.
The act is which the section is that says under this act, I'm entitled to a 3-month commercial rent holiday. I did a letter yesterday, but I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll get that over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Last question here, and actually it's just come in online, but also ties in with my last question, so I'm going to use it. This one's from Jack Wilson, and it's basically that there will be a lot of businesses out there that have got no income whatsoever. Is it possible to pause a business completely, including putting all staff on furlough, and then restarting at some stage in the future? Because there will still need to be some admin carried out, for example, on the furloughing, etc. But is there a way of just shrinking down a business so small and isolating it that it's effectively dormant until we get out of this? Question to anybody, really.
Yeah, I don't see that's a problem, because that's the whole idea. If you can't operate your business, but obviously somebody has got to process the furlough payments, and that's if it's a limited company, they're the sort of things we think a director will be able to do. Because it says you can still do your statutory obligations. But I think technically pay is a contractual obligation, but the tax and national insurance is a statutory obligation. So those sort of admin things should be fine. The thing about not working while on furlough, I think, as Kirill mentioned, is you can't do anything that makes a profit for your company. So I think things to keep things ticking over otherwise it just can't happen. You know, on a practical level, it can't happen. So I think practical things, sorting out furlough, you know, anything of that nature is fine. You just can't engage in any commercial profit-making activities while you or anyone else is furloughed.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. I mean, we've sort of doubled our time that we've allocated to this, but I know that we're going to get you back over the next couple of weeks. I think I've got you scheduled back in for next Wednesday. But if anybody has got any questions following this, if they and I didn't get to the ones that were submitted, I'm sorry I didn't get around to all of them. Send them in to me. I'm on james@blackbullmedia.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter @CarDealerEd, or hunt me down on LinkedIn, send me a message there, and I'll do my best to get you an answer. We're chatting to the Lawgistics guys all of the time, and they're very, very helpful, and I'm sure they'll continue to help you. And if we can't get something over the next couple of days, we'll make sure we cover it in next week's show. With regards to Car Dealer Live for the rest of the week, tomorrow I've got a really interesting panel, including Neil Smith from Imperial Car Supermarkets, Stephen Latham, who is the head of operations at the RMIF, and Steve Young from research group at the ICDP, who'll give us a global and a national picture on what this means for the used car market. And on Friday, I've got Jamie Capel from Car Key. I've published a full schedule on our website, but check back every day. We're on at midday every weekday on cardealermagazine.co.uk, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Car Dealer Magazine. Thanks again to the team from Lawgistics, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Pleasure.